Hi, I'm Alan Hook. I'm the Associate Head of School at the School of Communication and Media at Ulster University and a co-I on the Future Screens project. I want to show some of the research that I've been working on both at Lancaster University, where I do a part-time PhD by practice in speculative design, and the work that I've been doing at Ulster. So this is a project which is upstairs at the moment in the arcade, but unfortunately it's very difficult for you to put it on because of COVID restrictions, but this is a project I've been working on which is part of a large, broad body of practice where I'm thinking about more inclusive interspecies futures, as I would term it. So I need to put some context around it first. So the first thing is this idea of a speculative design. So speculative design comes out of a practice called critical design, and it thinks about what happens if we uncouple the process and methodologies from design from producing capital and to produce commercial objects, and starts to think about design as a process where we might think about social, cultural, and political issues. So how can we embody arguments into things, and those things can help us think differently about the world. So June and Ravi at RCA at the time, who start with this idea of a critical design practice, which moves into what we would call speculative design. So famously from speculative design is the futures cone. So if we think about the futures cone as moving from linearly along time, what we have is the idea of a probable future, which is the center of this cone, which is the kind of cultural trajectory that we're heading on. Okay, so this kind of straight line where we're heading into the future, and there is a scope or a space that we can explore that we're comfortable with. And then we have this idea of a plausible futures around that, and then the possible futures. So somewhere inside this idea of design as creating futures, we could think about a speculative future, a future outside of the kind of cultural trajectories that we're currently on. And what we see here is this idea of a preferable future. Okay, so instead of working on the probable, working towards the preferable, and this preferable comes under heavy critique in lots of different ways, as I think it should. So just before I go too far into this idea of a preferable futures, I think that what we need to ask ourselves is, who is designing that future? And whose preferable is it? Okay, so generally in terms of capital and commerce, that preferable future is something which is going to generate profit and keep everybody's head above the water and keep the economy growing. But the critique of this speculative design and this preferable futures is whose preference is it and who is authoring those objects? What I would say to you is we probably need less futures designed by middle-aged, middle-class, cis white guys like me, and a broader understanding of the future and a more inclusive understanding of the futures. What I want to talk about today, less people like me designing the future and more diverse voices and more diverse understandings about what culture could be and what society could be. So from a piece that I wrote a few years ago, this idea of embodying arguments into objects or artifacts. So this idea that new forms of research, new forms of applied research, embodying ideas, and I would think of the sort of design that I do as a form of philosophy. So it's instead of philosophy which comes through a structured language, it's a philosophy which can be experienced, and a philosophy which it forms what I would call a tacit knowledge. So some knowledges can be articulated through language, and some knowledges can't be articulated through language. They are very bodily and understood in and through the body. So Pollan says that really if we could see through another species' point of view, and in this he's talking about actually about plants and understanding our interaction and entanglement with plants, could be a cure for what he terms the disease of human self-importance. What I would call this is an anthropocentricism, because I'm an academic and I like big, long words. So anthropocentricism is anthro as in person, centricism as in putting into the center of the world. So what we have designed and created is a world where we put humans at the very center of society and we shape the world around it. What I would ask you is, how does a dog understand the environment that it lives in? How does it understand the radio as a disembodied voice? How does it understand the TV? How does it understand what I do on the computer? How does a dog understand the environment that we've created for it, which we are supposed to be caring for it inside that environment, and we have a social responsibility to understand things from other points of view. So this idea of a kind of multi-species entanglement, when we think about other species, what we need to be thinking about is that they are agentile beings, so they have agency in the world and they can shape and create the world as much as we can. We tend to only see things from a human point of view, but maybe if we had a less hierarchical future where we put humans at the top and all animals become a resource for us to draw on, to eat, for labor, for pleasure. If we had a more flattened hierarchy of our future, we could think slightly differently and have a different relationship, both with ourselves and understand our place in the world, but also understand our place in relationship to other species. So we need to move from a trend from what we would think of as user-centered design. So in design theory, we move towards kind of centering the user, and instead of me authoring objects, I do consultation and co-design with the end user, to what we would think of as a more than human design. And this more than human design understands the entanglement of the practice and our entanglement with other species. So our effect on other species and our understanding of those species' effect on us. So a more than human design stretches past that kind of understanding of humans as the center of the world. It understands our relationship with the world around us, be that kind of sentient animals like dogs, cats, horses, chickens, but also with plants, with fungi, with other entanglements with other species. So we need a more inclusive, a more multi-species, complex and entangled future. And that's hard to imagine. That's hard to get from a point where you have lived your life in the way that you have to what this preferable future could be and whose preference is that future. So what I've developed inside Equinize, I talk about as developing ways of understanding non-human animals, us as human animals, so non-human animals, and fostering an understanding of their subjectivity and the way that they experience the world. And the more that we can encourage people to not anthropomorphize other species and to understand other species on their own terms and the way that they understand and orientate themselves inside the world, the better our relationship and the better our future is with those other species. So Equinize is an immersive headset. This is prototype 8, I believe, which is a hacked-together Oculus, going into Unity and back out again. The one that's upstairs arrived last night untested, but uses its own ecosystem, so it's a Raspberry Pi, which takes 2 live camera feeds and displays them as an immersive experience to see the world through a horse's eyes. So a horse can see 350 degrees, it can see everything but its own back. It actually has a depth cone in front of it, so where the 2 eyes are angled and cross over, it can only perceive depth out the front in a 15 to 20% angle, and it can't see the color red. So the programming language inside the Raspberry Pi, the Python, takes these 280-degree camera feeds, takes them into the Pi, strips out the color red, and maps them onto a stereoscopic vision so that when you put on this headset, you can see everything but what's behind you, and you can't see red, which is the closest kind of operationalization of what we can achieve in an embodied experience of what it might be like to see through another species' eyes. Thank you.